Hi, this is Elliot Haspel, and welcome to another edition of Best Practices Weekly. We're going to try it a little bit differently this time with the computer instead of the flip paper, but we'll see how it goes. So this week we're going to be talking about reading motivation for English language learners, and this comes from an article in The Reading Teacher in which a professor interviewed several upper elementary students trying to uncover this idea of what motivates English language learners to want to read English books. And how does that differ from reading motivation for any student? And the researcher found 5 main elements that seem to make up ELL reading motivation, but there are a few caveats here. First of all, obviously English language learners are a wide group and a very diverse group, and you can't paint with that broad of a brush, which the author acknowledges. There are cultural differences, there are certainly individual differences, so none of this is to say that all ELLs learn the same way or are motivated in the same way, but from her study, this seemed to be the main themes that were emerging, and there's also secondary evidence from other research studies to support most of this. So, I'm going to go through each of the elements. The first one is the socio-cultural environment. And this means essentially that students' motivation to read is very closely associated with their parents' reading habits and their friends' reading habits. And this doesn't necessarily mean that their parents have to be the ones that their parents are reading English also, but if their parents are making it clear that reading is a value, so she gives the example of one student whose parents made him read every night for 30 minutes, just like that was a set-aside time, then students get the messages that reading is important and that reading is something that should be happening. And similarly, even for students whose parents were not particularly promoting reading, they could get that from their friends and their peer groups. If they were reading a lot, if they were talking about books, then the student was also motivated to want to read more. The second element is this idea of called integrative orientation, which essentially means that English language learners want to use reading as a way to integrate, to become a part of and oriented into their new American culture. And so this essentially means that when students may want to read English books so that they can talk about them with their American peers as sort of an entry point into the new culture, but also so they can actually learn more about America, more about their new country that they're in. And so one interesting finding here was that the students that the author interviewed actually weren't discussing the English books with students from their native countries. They were discussing the books with their American peers, for the most part. And if they couldn't find American peers to discuss the books with, they became less motivated to want to read. The last 3 of the elements, and these are in no particular order, first is instrumental motivation, and this means essentially there is something that students are trying to get out of reading English books, and that could be wanting to just improve their English skills, wanting to be to learn more in general, but these are students who are able to directly draw the link that the more books I read in English, the better my English vocabulary is going to be, or the more that I read in English, the more I'm going to learn, the better I'm going to be able to do in school. And this is sort of a very direct through line that students are able to draw between why they should be reading and just the sort of material benefits that they get out of that. Then this idea of perceived competence, which it seems to be something that is relatively focused on English language learners. And that is that students' perception of how good their English skills are correlates with their desire to read in English. Maybe not a shocking finding, but one that has a lot of support in other literature also, that if a student feels like, I'm not a particularly good English student, my English is bad, I'm not good at this, they're going to be more likely to not read English books. They're going to want to either not read at all or default back to their native language and literature where they do feel competent in the reading. And lastly, is this idea of just reading materials. Like most students, English language learners are going to be a lot more likely to want to read in English when they have access to books or texts which are at their level, their instructional level, and that are interesting to their particular curiosities and interests. So all of this together suggests a few things that teachers should be aware of when working with English language learners, one of which is to figure out where do they lie on these motivation factors, because each student's going to be different about the combination and which one is affecting them the most. And then are there ways to help foster students' motivation? The author suggests in particular things like making sure that students have the opportunity to talk socially about books in the classroom, so that that's a natural thing that they're interacting around books with their peers, since that's such an important influencer. Make sure that students do know the value of reading, both sort of inherently and for the more material reasons to be able to read in English, because if they're not getting those messages, then that can be a hindrance to their desire to read. And also, again, make sure that students have a good understanding of their competence in English, and that they understand that it's going to get better, and that wherever they're at the moment is competent and is good enough. So that they're not shying away from reading English text just because they're feeling not good enough at their English to do it. And then, in any good teacher, you want to make sure that there's lots of good, diverse reading material around, which is going to be at the right level for your various students. So, and lots of interesting ideas here to really think more deeply about English language learners and why they are or would not be motivated to read in English. So, hope that these are useful. So, thanks for watching and happy teaching.